Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. And once again, happy National Epilepsy Awareness Month. My name is Erica Denicola Shear, and I am the Director of Community Education and Advocacy Coordinator for the Epilepsy Foundation of Northeastern New York. Thank you so much for being here today for the fourth week of our November Education Series. Every Tuesday this month, we have been hosting education programming free of charge on different epilepsy-related topics. There will be one more of these Teaching Tuesday live sessions after today. So I hope that you will join us next Tuesday, November 30th, for our webinar on transitioning from pediatric to adult care in epilepsy. And I will make sure that I put the registration link in the chat once we get going here so that you have access to that. Again, attendance is free of charge, so I encourage you to also share that information with anyone else in your network or personal life who might be interested in attending. We wholeheartedly give thanks to this year's sponsors for our November education series: LivaNova, UCB, Greenwich Biosciences, Neurelis, and additional support from Supernus. It is their steadfast support of our agency and those we serve that allows us to plan and offer programming like this and to offer it free of charge this year. So if you'd like to learn more about our sponsors, please visit our virtual exhibitor hall, which will be available through the end of November, and I'll be sharing a link in the chat for that as well. During today's session, please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions you have. You can send those questions to everyone, which should be highlighted right now, or if you prefer to send them to me privately, obviously, please feel free to do that. And after our lecture, I can moderate a Q&A and ask your questions to Dr. French. As time permits, we may also be able to take a few questions live at the end. So we'll get to that at the end. Now to introduce our speaker, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Jacqueline French. Dr. French is a professor of neurology in the Comprehensive Epilepsy Center at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine and the founder and director of the Epilepsy Study Consortium, an academic group that has performed a number of early phase clinical trials in epilepsy and has developed new methodologies for epilepsy trials. Dr. French trained in neurology at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York and did her fellowship training in EEG and epilepsy at Mount Sinai Hospital and Yale University. She is also heavily involved with the Epilepsy Foundation of America, and we are very excited to have her here with us today to tell us about all the exciting work being done in epilepsy research and innovation. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. French.
Very, very happy to be here and happy to answer any questions and listen to your feedback as we walk through the things that the Epilepsy Foundation is doing. I serve as the Chief Medical and Innovation Officer of the Epilepsy Foundation. Obviously everything we do is to improve the lives of people with epilepsy. So how do we do that? Our mantra is improving the care of people with epilepsy in a time frame that matters, speeding new therapies to people that need them, improving the development and implementation of devices in the epilepsy space, and you will hear a lot about harnessing the power of data to improve the lives of people with epilepsy. And how do we do that? We like to hold conferences that are transformative for the field and create new policy, host think tanks to drive conversations and set research agendas, leverage data to understand the drivers of outcome in people with epilepsy and ultimately, hopefully, change them to better outcomes, develop new strategic partners that can expand our reach, and engage and partner with the developers of new therapeutics and technology at an early stage where we can have an influence in that development, and invest in assets with high likelihood of benefit. And now, our sort of new strategy is to obtain a return on that in order to be able to reinvest. So our main projects right now are the Epilepsy Digital Experience Navigator, which we fondly know as Eden, something called My Seizure Gauge, which I'll tell you about, which is about seizure forecasting, the Epilepsy Ventures Fund, which is investment in therapies and diagnostic devices of the future, and hosting research events such as the Epilepsy Foundation Pipeline Conference and the Research Roundtable for Epilepsy. So I'm going to be telling you about a number of those things. So let's start with Eden, which is sort of, I guess you could say this is my passion project. This is a personalized digital services platform for people with epilepsy and caregivers of people with epilepsy. And the idea is to aggregate real-world data for hopefully thousands of people with epilepsy that will inform therapeutic outcomes, but at the same time work as a personal insight provider to people with epilepsy and help them with self-management. And I hope that you will agree that that's what it does. So let me start out by saying that people sort of have this idea that therapies sort of spring out and we know everything that we need to know. But in fact, this is kind of what we know about therapies when they are approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And this is really what we don't know, and we're trying to find out. So clinical trials don't tell us everything. And why do they not tell us everything? This is my favorite analogy, and hopefully it will speak to you. So if you do a trial, the trial may be like asking the question, you know, if I say, does a drug work in Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, for example? That's like asking the question, can a bus get me from New York to Philly? Asking, how long is the bus going to take? Is it going to arrive? What is the likelihood of a crash, which is the equivalent of, you know, an adverse outcome or an adverse event? Or what's the cost of getting from New York to Philly by bus, right? But you as a patient, as me as a doctor, that's not really the question that we're asking. Can a bus get me from New York to Philly? The question that we're asking is, how should I get from New York to Philly? Or how should I, as your doctor, tell you to get from New York to Philly? And obviously the answer isn't going to be the same for everybody, because it's going to be colored by a myriad of very personal characteristics that are only your characteristics, such as, well, maybe I'm claustrophobic, so I don't want to go in a plane. Or maybe I don't have a lot of money, so I can't go in a plane and I need to go the cheapest way. Or maybe I need to go really fast and therefore I should go by a plane. Or maybe I have my own car and I want to stop along the way, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many reasons why you should go to Philly a different way than somebody else should go to Philly, to Philly. But clinical trials can't tell us that. They can't tell us what's best for an individual. So how do we get there talking about what is best for an individual? Well, we hope that if everybody with epilepsy donates their journey with the drug that they're taking, and if we understand enough about their particular circumstances, we can combine the information from all of these journeys, and that could inform us how to pick drugs better for the next person based on more individualized characteristics. And this is all part of a burgeoning field called digital health. So what is digital health? It's a strategy to leverage digital tools. We all do it every day. Technologies and services to positively transform health, and also connect and empower people to manage health and wellness. And that's where our Epilepsy Digital Experience Navigator comes in to implement our digital health vision for people living with epilepsy. So what does Eden do? It allows us to aggregate a lot of different types of data on a given person. And it does two things. It takes that data, it takes all the personal identifiers off, that is, it anonymizes that data and puts it in a database for us to learn about what's happening in the real world with epilepsy, but it also puts that information together for an individual so that they can see what's going on with themselves and make it easier for them to track and understand their journey with epilepsy. So a few things that it does is, first, it's going to say, how old are you? Where do you live? What's your gender? What other medicines are you taking? And then there's some surveys you can take about what's your quality of life and how's your mood now. I'm going to show you what S-Check is. S-Check is a different type of seizure diary. It's a non-diary seizure diary, because we know that as a physician, I can tell you that when people come and visit me in the office, we can spend 50% of a visit trying to figure out when seizures happened and what type of seizures happened. And that 50% of that visit could have been better spent talking to people about the pros and cons of different therapies or what's going on in their life. And I truly wish that everybody would use a seizure diary, but I know personally that only 10% of my patients do. And we've been like scratching our heads as to why do more people not use seizure diaries, and how can we help them use an easier seizure diary. Some people use a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, but right now we only can connect a Fitbit that connects information about their sleep and information about their steps that they take and other things. And we actually integrate that into our platform in order for people to see everything all in one place. And another thing that we integrate is, we all have access to our electronic health record, but it's kind of hard to access. And it's not, again, correlated with everything else that's going on with you. So we are going to put that in so that you can see everything at once. So as time goes on and Eden grows, we're going to try and plug in more and more and more data so that you can see everything in one place. Wearables, perhaps information from your pharmacy, information from any genetic tests you might have, and so on and so on and so on. So I am going to actually now stop sharing this, and I am going to share my screen if I can, and I am going to actually show you Eden. So this can work both on the phone. Actually, yeah, I'm missing one cord that I need. If you can just excuse me for 1 minute. Sorry, talk amongst yourselves.
No problem. I guess, since I will take this opportunity to say that if anyone participated in our family conference last week, another thing that I can share with you in the chat is our family conference evaluation. If you fill that out, it just provides us with really good information that we can use to inform, how we might improve that program in the future. So thank you to anyone who has already filled it out, and to anyone who still needs to, who did attend last week. I'm going to put that in the chat right now too. So please take a few minutes to fill that out later.
All right. So hopefully I have the opportunity to share my screen. And there we go. All right, so I have already signed up for Emblema, but if you were to sign up for Eden, you would just go through a few simple steps, and it would ask you some information about yourself. Whether you're male or female, how many seizures you're having, presuming you're the person with epilepsy, and so on. And I'm going to show you this, and I'm also going to show how it looks on the phone, but we're going to start with how it looks on the computer. So here is the very cool thing about Eden. So I'm going to connect records, okay? So it tells me all of the medical systems that are sort of close by to me. turns out that I have already connected my records from NYU, which is where I'm seen. So I'm going to ask it to update just to show you what it looks like. It already pre-populates with your sign-in information if you have that saved. And I'm going to sign into NYU MyChart, and I'm going to tell you that Eden can work with most of the medical records, most of the hospital electronic medical systems that are out there, not just Epic, but others than MyChart. So I'm going to let it continue, and it's going to ask me what information am I willing to share, and I've shared all my information here, and I would like to share it for a year, and I'm going to allow access, and it's just that simple. And let me show you what allowing that access does, because it's pretty cool. So now that I have allowed it to have my health records, and again, the only person who knows that these are your health records are you. So your information, your identifying information is not going to be available to anybody, and I'm willing to share mine here. But, it turns out that I have had some eye procedures at NYU. So now I know exactly when they happened and I can keep track of them. What medications do I take? These are the medications when I started them, and then if I stopped them, it would be when I stopped them. And these are all the labs, the test results that I've had. And if I want to track a particular, I don't have any levels because I don't have epilepsy, but if, let's say, I was on Tegretol and I wanted to track Tegretol levels, I could track them up here. But all my test results are going to show up. It just turns out that COVID tests are the only thing I happen to have in test results. It even can let me know, for example, when did I have my last tetanus shot? Oh, it was in 2009. Maybe I need another one. Here's when my COVID vaccines were. Here's when my flu vaccines were, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, if I had allergies, they would be here. And everything is right here so that I can keep track of it, and it's on my dashboard, and it's very easy to access. Now, in addition to that, I'm now going to switch to showing you my phone. So what we want is QuickTime. Is this gonna work for me? Hold on. There we go. Yes, it is. All right, so I'm gonna share this. Share my screen. Where did share my, there we go. Okay, so hopefully all of you can see this. And what this shows you is that this is my phone, and it is my messages, and this is S-check. So every day I have the opportunity to tell Eden whether I want to be asked every day, every week, every month, or every 3 months about how often I had seizures or when my seizures happened. Because obviously, if you're only having monthly seizures, you don't necessarily want to be bothered every day. If you have daily seizures, maybe you do. So I'm going to go and say, okay, I'm ready to tell you about my seizures. And so when I click that, it says report a new seizure. Have you had a seizure? Yes, I did. When did it happen? It happened on the 22nd. I had 2. I can write a note saying, big one, let's say, Then if I had another seizure date, I could put that in. Did I miss any meds? No, I didn't miss any meds. And did I have any side effects? No, I didn't have any side effects. And that's as simple as it gets for checking in that you had a seizure. And then you can go to your dashboard, and it'll take like 3 nanoseconds because I just put new information in. And here you go. What I just reported is right here, 2 seizures reported. And then if I want to find out more about it, I can go to those 2 seizures and I can see they happened on November 22nd. I didn't miss any meds. It says it was a big one, and this is when it tells me, you can't see it here because this thing is blocking it, but it tells me that, there we go. It tells me when I recorded it. In addition, because I have very simply connected my Fitbit, which is also a very simple thing, I can say, look, I only slept 7 hours last night. You know, how much sleep did I get the last time I had a seizure? I slept 8 hours the last time I had a seizure. This is how many steps I walked, and it's all right there for you to look at and keep track of. So this is an opportunity for people to have an easy tool to monitor and track with. I'm going to stop share and go back to my slides. Oh, host disabled screen sharing. I'm the host, okay. And then basically, this isn't we're coming in January. After you put all that information in addition to looking at it the way I just showed you on the phone, you can also have basically a dashboard where it shows you how many of different seizure types you had, any med changes you had, what your seizure trends are, and you can easily take that to your doctor and show it to them and save a lot of time that you otherwise would have had to spend explaining all of these things to your doctor. And what are we going to do with this anonymized information once we have it? Well, this is just an example I wanted to show you from an observational study that we had, basically asked people to provide the kind of information that people will be providing in Eden. And this shows you, it's a little complicated, but this shows you what happened to people. If this is 100% of people who are on either Keppra or all other medicines when they started to have seizures and they started to be treated with medicine, and what percent of them stayed on it over time. And this is 100 weeks, 200 weeks, 300 weeks. And the blue is Keppra and the red is other drugs. And you can see that the likelihood of remaining on Keppra is much, much less. So that line drops off, that population drops off much, much faster than the population that was started on other medicine. And when we look at the reason why people stopped using levetiracetam, a lot of times it was because of behavioral side effects. So this just sort of gives you some sense of the type of information that we can get when we compare drugs with other drugs in large populations of people. So why is the Epilepsy Foundation doing this? Because we are a patient advocacy organization and we are guided by the epilepsy community's voice and needs. We are the stewards of epilepsy.com, and we hope to also be able to use Eden to tap into all the information that is very hard to navigate and find on epilepsy.com. So, like as Eden grows, hopefully, if you say that, your mood is not good, it'll take you directly to information on what you can do about mood on epilepsy.com. It's a trusted organization, and we hope that the community trusts us with their data. so that we can improve the lives of people to epilepsy. And, whereas the study that I just showed you, we could only follow people for so long, now we want to continue to follow people perhaps over a lifetime. We also have another program called Epilepsy, ELLIS, which is the Epilepsy Learning Healthcare System, which is also acquiring data, but instead of asking the patient for the data, we're asking the doctors for the data. And as you can see, this is aggregate weekly seizure documentation over time. We have 12 clinical sites, and the ultimate goal is for these sites to teach each other about the best practices to improve care for people with epilepsy. And the current priority areas are seizure frequency documentation, which again we hope Eden will help with, and what are barriers to medication, to taking medication. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about another initiative of the Epilepsy Foundation, which is My Seizure Gauge, which is a $3 million investment that we gave to an international team, including the Mayo Clinic, King's College in London, the University of Melbourne, and a company called Sear Medical. And this $3 million grant was to develop seizure forecasting. And the team has identified possible means of forecasting seizures from seizure diaries and heart rate measurements taken from Fitbit. And I'm going to show you a little bit about what they've been working on. So why seizure forecasting rather than seizure prediction? Seizure prediction would mean I can tell you exactly the minute, the day, the time that a seizure is going to happen. Seizure forecasting is like a weather forecast. There's a 70% chance that you're going to have a seizure in the next hour. There's a 70% chance you're going to have a seizure in the next day. So why are we doing seizure forecasting? Because it's sort of like a weather forecast in a way. We can tell when there's a storm brewing, when things are not looking good in the brain. And when there's a storm brewing, you know that there is likely to be lightning. But you don't know exactly when that lightning is going to happen, and you don't know where exactly it's going to strike. So it's similar to that in that we can tell you that there's a high likelihood that a seizure or lightning will happen, but we can't be absolutely sure. So let me give you sort of the history of where all this came from. So back many years ago, there was a company that developed a device called the Seizure Advisory System. Now, this was a device that actually had to be implanted into the brain, as you can see in this little gentleman here. He has electrodes in his brain, and they basically took people who had these implanted electrodes and they fed all their information into a computer, which created an algorithm. And the algorithm then fed back into a little handheld belt-worn device, which you can see this gentleman holding, and that device would provide 3 different colors of light. It would provide either a blue light, a white light, or a red light. So what did those 3 colors mean? The white light meant that there was no way to predict whether things were good or things were bad based on the EEG activity that was going on at that time. The blue light meant you will not have a seizure while that blue light is on. You are safe. Seizure's not going to happen. A red light meant, gee, there's a storm going on. There is a high likelihood of a seizure. Not 100% chance, but a high likelihood. And what you're looking at here is one person over, let's say, a couple of weeks. So you can see it starts in July and it ends July 6th and it ends on July 24th. And what colors he had over the course of the day. And you can see that there was quite a lot of time when he was in blue light, which meant that he could be reassured that a seizure was not going to happen. There was some time that was in white, uncertain light, and then there was a few times when there was a red light, and that little lightning bolt means that a seizure actually did happen. So you can see that on July 8th, he had a red light and a seizure happened. On July 11th, he had a red light, but no seizure happened. He had a very short red light on July 13th. And then going down to July 24th, he had two red lights and seizures happened. So about 50% of the time, if a red light came on, he would have a seizure quite shortly thereafter. So you have to ask yourself whether this would have been a useful thing in regards to knowing that only on those days there was very short periods of time when seizures might happen, and a lot of time when seizure was not going to happen. And interestingly enough, there were 15 people who wore this device for many years, and the blue light had 100% accuracy. So the red light didn't mean you were absolutely going to have a seizure, but the blue light was 100% accurate in saying you were not going to have a seizure while that blue light was on. So that made people think, well, there's something going on in the brain. There's some electrical activity that's telling this algorithm in this computer that a seizure might happen. So people started to look at people with a device called an RNS, or a responsive neurostimulator, which is implanted in the brain. And they started to look at that information over very long periods of time. So here you see, for example, September through July. September through July, you can see that there are, on the top graph, there are waves that are going up and down and up and down and up and down. And you can see that during the ups and downs, usually when the activity is going up, there are red dots. So that up and down reflects epileptic activity in the brain. And what we can see in many people over time, and again, these are months we're looking at, that seizure activity ebbs and flows. It goes up, it comes down. It goes up, it comes down. And at the bottom, it's just been smoothed out so that you can see. And that seizures ride on the waves when they happen. And really, when you look at the bottom of the waves, when there's less seizure activity, or epileptic activity, I should say, seizures are not happening. So these are called, we now have a name for them, they are called multi-DN cycles. And we find that people have a tendency to have seizures in clusters every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, and everybody's, multi-DN cycle is a little bit different, but many people have these multi-DN cycles. So of course, not everybody has electrodes put in their brain. So how do we find out what people's multi-DN cycles are so we can help them plan a little better? So actually, if you look at just people keeping track of when they had seizures, and again, with Eden, we're trying to make it easier for people to keep track of when they had seizures, we can see that there are certain times of day when they're more likely to have a seizure, there's certain times of the week, and certain times of the month. And the more accurate you can be in tracking your seizures, the more accurate you can be in predicting when the next seizure is going to happen. So just by tracking seizures, you can see some of these cycles. And then when you add to that it turns out that your heart rate also has up and down cycles, and that heart rate can be detected by a Fitbit, which again is a piece of information that we can track very easily. So if you combine when people say they're having their seizures with these heart rate cycles that you see by Fitbit, you can get a pretty good and accurate determination of seizure forecasting. Now, in addition, even more accurate forecasting can come from determining the electrical activity in the brain. And here again, we see somebody who has implanted electrodes. This is a device that's being worked on in Australia. It's called an Epiminder. And this is something that the investigator or the developer there envisions that people will wear day in, day out, and it'll be tracking their electrical activity and telling them when they are at risk for a seizure. And here you can see, again, over many months, the little red arrows on the top are when seizures happen, and you can see that they are happening when the electrical activity is rising. And April is missing because the person didn't plug in their device during April. So the My Seizure Gauge team from the Epilepsy Foundation is trying to combine a number of different factors, including the multi-DN cycles as reported as seizures, sleep quality, alcohol use, mood symptoms, which may indicate when people are more or less in a cycle, and heart rate and other things to see what's the best combination of signals without having to put electrodes in the brain that can forecast that a seizure is going to happen. So the idea is people wear devices, and again, it might be as simple as a Fitbit, it might be as complicated as something that is implanted in the head. It goes to an analytics platform and then goes back to the person so that they can determine whether they are at high or low risk. So this is what it might look like. So you might have an app on your phone where there are light days and dark days saying, you know, you are not at risk for a seizure, you are at risk for a seizure. This is a good time, this is a bad time. So you can see here higher risk is in blue and lower risk is in pale blue. And this will get better and better and better, hopefully, over time. And believe it or not, this particular app is already available in Australia and is going to come to the United States soon. So moving off of seizure forecasting, I'm going to talk about the Pipeline Conference, which is another thing that the Epilepsy Foundation does. This is a conference that happens once every other year. And everybody is invited, including people with epilepsy, their families, people in the pharmaceutical industry, people, physicians who are performing trials, and we discuss hot topics of interest. And all the companies that have drugs in development present 10-minute updates. And that includes companies that may have a drug that's never been in a human being yet. It's very, very early, to companies that are already well on their way in clinical trials and a drug is on its way to approval. So if you want to know what's in the pipeline, this is a good one-stop shop to get up to speed. Usually we have about 30 presenters who are presenting their drugs and devices and diagnostic devices and so on. So our next conference is in March 3rd to 4th, 2022 in Santa Clara, California. And it is going to be hybrid, so people can attend online, and we're going to have a special price for people with epilepsy and their families to attend. We're going to have some topics such as personalized medicine, how far have we come and where are we going, the impact of COVID on clinical development, trying to create equitable and informative trials, and how do we get people to adopt new technology. Another conference that we run, very importantly, is the Research Roundtable for Epilepsy. And this has occurred annually since 2016. And we bring together the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, the ones that ultimately decide which drugs are going to be approved or not approved, and the companies that are developing new therapies and technology to address roadblocks to research and development and to have some harmonization so everybody's on the same page. So by regular meetings, we have made major strides to help the epilepsy community. For example, when a drug was approved, it used to be approved only for add-on therapy, and people who wanted to use it by itself, which was kind of crazy, you know, like the FDA was saying, if you're on 2 drugs and you add, well, let's say you're on 1 drug and you add a new drug and the new drug works perfectly and you're seizure-free, you shouldn't take away the old drug. which is crazy because you should take away the old drug if the new drug is working perfectly. So we eliminated the need for specific trials to show that a drug worked by itself, so that more people would have access to these drugs. Another big problem that we recently faced was how to get drugs down to infants without exposing infants to serious risks in clinical trials. If a drug works in a 3-year-old, it's going to work in a 2-year-old, and it's going to work in a 1-year-old. So now we have moved this along so that once a drug is approved in older children, the company just has to show that it is safe in younger children, and that it works the same in the body in younger children, and they can get an approval down to 1 month of age. So based on this, for example, the new drug brivaracetam, or Briviact, got an approval in patients 1 month and older, so that we can get access to our young and very vulnerable young people with epilepsy. So these are some things that we've been able to do just by sitting down at the table and talking with the FDA. Moving on to the Epilepsy Venture Fund, the goal of the Epilepsy Venture Fund is to advance better therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, wearables, and data utilization to improve the quality of life for people with epilepsy now. And as I said before, to leverage the power of donations to build an evergreen fund to support future investment. So basically, the Epilepsy Foundation is inviting people to donate funds, and those funds specifically will be used to invest in new therapies. And if those new therapies are successful and they come to market and they are profitable, then that profit will come back to the fund to invest new things, which will then come back to the fund to invest in new things, etc. So your dollar that you invest now will not only help a company to develop a new therapy, but also might provide an even bigger investment for future assistance. So in June, the first Epilepsy Venture Fund investment was selected, and it was a company called MeQ, which is a passive seizure monitoring system. It's very cool. It's a sort of an ultrasound device that sits over the bed of an infant and can look through the covers of the infant to see whether there's seizure activity going on and whether the infant is breathing properly, or there's been a change in breathing or movement. And the idea is to count seizures at night when they might be missed. And this investment came from the Shark Tank. And the Shark Tank is an annual event that showcases startups working on new products for people with epilepsy. And the Epilepsy Venture Fund now provides an investment prize, and it's up to $250,000. And again, that will be invested, and there will be a return on that investment if that is a successful product. There is a second prize, which is called a Community Award. It's $25,000. Not as much money, but this is to showcase products or ideas that are not on a pathway to commercialization, but might be very helpful to people with epilepsy. And I'll give you an example of that. So in the first Shark Tank, money went to something called SAMI, which was and some of you may have heard of this, it was a camera that can see in complete darkness, and runs on the Apple phone, so that people could keep an eye on their loved one and see whether a seizure was happening, even in a darkened room in the middle of the night. And then one that I am very thrilled with is this one over here called Cesario. This is Amir Helmi, and he is at that time, he was a 14-year-old, and he created this app for a phone. It was only for an Android, which if you kept the phone on your person, You could designate a person in case of emergency, and if you fell down and you didn't get up, the phone would realize that you had fallen down, and it would not only call the person who was designated, but would also tell that person where you were. In other words, it would give your GPS location. And that, of course, would give a lot of peace of mind to the person who was using it. And the reason that I am highlighting this young man is because he's now just graduated from a master's program, and he still is wanting to develop new technology for people with epilepsy. And because he got this Shark Tank prize when he was 14 years old, despite the fact that he has no family member with epilepsy and does not have epilepsy himself, he is completely committed to a life of trying to help people with epilepsy. And I think that that's a great investment of funds in him. So this just shows you the type of awards that we looked at in 2021. There was a gentleman who created a photosensitive cinema, which allowed people with photosensitive epilepsy to watch movies with potentially sensitive flashing lights, but do it safely with a new technology. So that kids didn't have to worry when they watched the same films as their colleagues were watching or their friends were watching. And then the winner was Deborah Koltai, who developed an app to build resilience and self-management skills in Uganda among adolescents with epilepsy. And then there was Richard Smith, who had a shower belt safety system that was a hook that hooked onto your belt when you were in the shower. It was a shower belt. And if you fell in the shower, it would turn the water off and thereby prevent drowning. We had a number of people who were interested in the investment award, including EpiHunter, which is a device that tracks petit mal or absence seizures. I already told you about MeQ, which was for looking at seizures in children. There was a company called Neurosonics that had a device that would potentially work for epilepsy surgery. And then another company that had leadless scalp EEG or electroencephalography. Coming to the end, we have an accelerator course, so we have lots of people who are interested in developing devices for epilepsy. Some of them are better at it than others, so we actually provide them with a 6-week virtual course for startups that cover topics like how do they get to the market, what's the regulatory path, and how do they pitch to investors so that we can try and get them to be more successful. And finally, I want to say you can check all of this out at the American Epilepsy Society if you happen to be there. We have a number of posters that we're presenting. We also have a booth where we will be demonstrating Eden. And I will stop my share and ask for any questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. French. That was really fascinating, and I learned so much. And so I am sure that everyone else here did too. Really exciting stuff that people are working on, and that's just fabulous to know that there's so many people invested in helping people with epilepsy, get better control and improve quality of life and different things like that. So that's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, I would welcome anyone to either use the raise hand function, or if you want to unmute and ask a question, you're welcome to, or you can still utilize the chat.
And if nobody asks a question, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Yes.
Oh, sorry, Dr. French. I do have a question.
I see the question. Yeah, I see the question.
Okay, perfect.
I'm just going to address it. So this is not research that's going on at NYU. It's research that's going on through the Epilepsy Foundation. But if you want to get established as a patient at NYU, it's very easy. You just call us up. Go to the NYU website, type in epilepsy, and all of the doctors there are fabulous, and you would be welcomed, is what I would say. But if anybody is interested, that was the question that I was going to ask. First of all, if anybody is going to be so bold as to tell me what they think about Eden, number one, and number two, would you sign up for it? Number three, how comfortable would you feel with donating anonymized data to help people learn about the journey with epilepsy? So if anybody is bold enough to unmute or even turn your camera on, we can have a chat. Oh, and yes, it does include people out of the area, because now you can do virtual visits, so anything is possible. Anybody? I think if I wait long enough, maybe somebody will answer.
Hi, yes. I would like to say my son was diagnosed with epilepsy, and I'm a former nurse, and I was starting to see a connection between certain times of day, certain behaviors would precede his seizure activity. And I was keeping notes, and this was not very well appreciated by the physicians, I'm afraid. So
Sorry
I
to
would
hear
say, I
that.
know, because I
Sorry.
really started to see patterns, over 2 years. So we would welcome that. I think it's wonderful. You log in, weekly or depending on the person's frequencies, and that would take a great burden off of note taking and having to be mindful. Like you just log it in because that's the way we are, and then you move on with life. So it's logged, and I think eventually, or it's already being as your presentation shows, certain things are starting to become evident. And I think that's very valuable because other patients could be helped. Sooner or later, things don't hide so well, as you start to examine, and we have all the researchers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And people are so um, excited about looking at this
Mhm.
data and finding, patterns and finding answers. And one thing that some people have asked is, like, is this associated, for example, monthly cycles is pretty common. So people have asked, is this associated with menstrual cycles? And what I find fascinating is that it is just as common to have monthly cycles in men and women. But if it's in a woman, of course it's going to be associated with a menstrual cycle. And if it's in a man, you can't because there isn't one, right? So, but it doesn't happen more often in women. And then another thing that we get asked is this associated with phases of the moon? And people have actually looked at that because, again, that is a very common thing. If you're having a monthly cycle, to say it must be the moon. But there really is no association with the phase of the moon. And some people actually have cycles even with seasons, so they're more likely to have seizures during the summer or the winter. And it's only when you start to track this information that you start to see those patterns. So I completely agree with you that the time to start tracking and seeing those patterns is now, and we have to sort of get the word out. And if anybody is interested in being a tester for Eden, so we're doing beta testing now, please let me know. I can actually put in the chat. Um, hang on. So our patient engagement manager is Shalkeisha, who is fantastic. And I'm going to put her email in the chat, and just feel free to reach out. if you're interested in being a beta tester.
That's excellent. Are there any other questions from any of the attendees, or Dr. French, do you have any other questions to throw out there to attendees?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And, as always, if anyone has any follow-up questions, would like, you know, me to share, how to find more information about what we've gone through today, feel free to reach out to me after. I'll put my email in the chat once again too. I'm more than happy to help you, locate more information. If you have a question for Dr. French, I can pass it along to her and give you the response back. You don't have to walk away and never get more information about these things today. So if you think on it more, things come up, more thoughts come up, please feel free to reach out to me.
And I see a few people who might be representing your sponsors. And if they have any questions that they want to ask, they can feel free to contact me as well.
Wonderful. Okay.
Okay.
Well, with that, thank you so much, Dr. French. Once again, it's really been such a pleasure working with you, and thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and information about some of the research that's been going on. And thank you so much to everyone for attending today. Once again, please don't forget to register for next week's final Teaching Tuesday Live topic if you are interested, transitioning from pediatric to adult care in epilepsy. And once again, please check out our virtual exhibitor hall, which the link is in the chat, and feel free to fill out that conference evaluation if you attended last week, if you wouldn't mind, as that again helps us improve our programs in the future. But thank you all so much. I wish you all a really wonderful rest of your week and Thanksgiving. I hope everyone is gonna, has some nice plans to celebrate that holiday. So everyone take care, and I wish you all well, and I hope to see you back next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.